Today we're going to try and help you find out why your Phalaenopsis isn't flowering again after it flowered so magnificently the first time. So it's been growing and it's looking good, but the flowers just aren't coming. And when it does, you get all those magnificent little buds coming and they drop off before you get the glory of the flowers again. And no, it's not because they hate you. Perhaps it's because your mother-in-law does and she keeps moving your orchids around. But that's another story. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming videos so you don't miss out on a thing. So Phalaenopsis are tropical orchids and they winter flowering. So basically what happens is late autumn, they start to initiate those little flower spikes just as the temperatures start dipping slightly, and then through the winter that flower spike grows and you land up with this amazing display generally in late winter, early spring. This is all forced by the temperature changes. So they just need that slight dip in temperatures to force out the flower spikes. So how do we go about perfecting that so we can force those orchids to flower in our home? So they're going to need a fairly dramatic drop in temperatures in the evening compared to the daytime. So between 10 and 15 degrees, that will force those flower spikes to be initiated. And then you want to keep that period going for a couple of weeks just to make sure that that flower spike is mature enough so that if you do happen to raise your temperatures again, the flower spike can continue growing. And what temperatures are those, you may ask? Well, the daytime temperatures are anything from as high as 38 degrees to around 28-ish, 80 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And your evening temperatures are around 24, 26, so that's around, 5 degrees Fahrenheit. But then to force flowering in these conditions, we've got to drop those temperatures. Anything around the 85 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, which is around 32 degrees Celsius, is going to inhibit your flower production. And in the evening, temperatures around that 24 degrees Celsius, which is about 75 degrees Fahrenheit, are also going to inhibit your flower production. So we've got to get both those temperatures below those maximums, because they both work independently. It's not like if you just reduce your night temperatures while your day temperatures are that high, will you get it to flower. You've got to reduce that day temperature also so that there's no inhibition happening. If we can get our evening temperatures down to around 15 or 20 degrees Celsius, that's about 60, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, I think, in that sort of range. And then your day temperatures, as long as you keep them under that 30 degrees, if you can get them down to about 28, you should be perfect to go. And then, as I say, just after a couple of weeks, your flower spike will have been initiated far enough that it will carry on growing, even if the daytime temperatures then do spike. So other than this forceful initiation of flower spikes through temperature control, light is probably the biggest reason why your Phalaenopsis might be flowering. It's probably in a too dark a position. So if you've got that beautiful, rich, emerald green color on your Phalaenopsis, you know you're pretty much not going to get flowers. You need this light, bright green, almost with a yellowish tinge, and that's when you get the flowers. So you want to give it as bright a light as possible, avoiding direct sunlight. Because direct sunlight, and you're just going to land up with those ugly brown sunburn marks on your orchid. And too much sun, you'll kill the whole thing. And the reason temperature is such a big thing in initiating the flower spike on your Phalaenopsis is because they come from the tropics. So your daylight hours aren't going to matter that much to it because it gets a constant number of daylight hours. It hasn't been genetically trained to react to the number of daylight hours to force the flowering. So it uses temperature to control it. So, and then when you ask, how do I get these blooms to last longer? I've heard if I put them in a dark space, the flowers are going to last longer because they're not going to be affected by so much light. Well, you're wrong there. You'll probably land up, the flowers will probably land up being aborted a lot quicker because the plant is then struggling to produce all that chlorophyll so that it can make as much of that energy as needed to keep those flowers going. So instead, what it does is keep the plant going, and it loses the flowers so it can keep itself healthy. So putting it in the dark is a surefire way of making all these beautiful blooms drop. And what about putting it in a cold room? Will that work? Will that keep the flowers longer? Yes, to a degree it does, because what it does, it slows down all the metabolic processes in your plant, and in such it should also slow down what's happening in the flowers and thus make them last longer on your plant. But remember, too much cold is a bad thing, because then your plant will just abort those flowers. So below 15 degrees, sorry for you. And then how do we stop all those flowers from just falling off? Well, some of the reasons that you're going to get that bud drop is from things like fluctuations in temperature. So if it's too close to a heater, if it's too close to an air conditioner, if it's in an area that's going to get those drafts that are just going to bring that ambient temperature around it down or up, those buds are going to fall off. It's going to go into shock and just drop all those buds. So it's best to find a sheltered spot that's going to get all that light and those constant temperatures without those sudden fluctuations that are going to damage the blooms. Also, the dark. Without all that light, as with your flowers, your plant isn't going to be able to be healthy enough to keep those buds going. So the plant is going to look after itself first and worry about the flowers after. So it just drops all those buds to ensure it can survive. And another big reason that you can get bud fall is after moving your orchid that's just beginning to bloom, you bring it out of your hothouse and you put it in your lounge. That climate difference with the different amount of light, the different temperatures, the different amount of humidity, that's going to put your plant into shock, and those buds are going to fall off and you'll be miserably disappointed. So to avoid that, leave it in your hothouse until all those blooms have opened, and then bring it into your house, knowing that you still have at least 2 months to enjoy those flowers. Another reason that you get this bud and bloom fall or bud blast is from inconsistent care. If you've allowed your plant to dehydrate, you know the plant's going to want to look after itself. It's going to drop those buds. If you're overwatering, those roots rot and there's no energy being absorbed through the roots, no water, no food, no nutrients, and again, those buds are going to drop. If you're feeding too much, you'll end up with a saline mix. It's going to stop that plant from being able to absorb water and nutrients, and your buds are going to drop. And I've heard people complaining about pollution being another reason for bud drop. They say, never put your orchid in the boot of a car. The fumes from your car are going to kill your orchid. But it's probably the heat in your boot that's probably doing the same thing. And anyway, you don't put your child in the boot, so don't put your orchid in the boot. And another important factor in blooming is getting all that new growth. We have to get that new growth, especially because it's a monopodial orchid. It's growing upwards, and the flower spikes come in from the base of the leaves. And as the orchid grows up and that node matures, so it will then push up the next flower spike. So without any new nodes growing, your flower spikes can't come. So we've got to ensure that that new growth is growing up, so that as your orchid grows, each node growing up can alternately shoot up flower spikes until a point where your plant is strong enough that you can have 2 flower spikes on at a time. So ensuring that your buds don't fall off. Be aware of changes in climate, moving from one room to another, large temperature fluctuations like from drafts or air conditioners or heating devices, from improper care such as overwatering or underwatering or overfeeding, and also and also from your light conditions. Ensure they've got enough strong light for them to photosynthesize properly, to be able to use all this energy in their blooms. And ensuring that your orchids rebloom again. Remember, temperature control is important, and light again. Light is probably one of the biggest reasons that your Phalaenopsis doesn't rebloom. It's because you've put it in an area that's too dark, that the plant looked beautiful when it was in flower, but now it needs more light to be able to continue growing healthily. And then when it comes to reflowering after your blooms are finished, you land up with this spike, and then should you trim it all the way down to the bottom, or do you want to leave it to reflower? This is really a personal choice. By trimming it back down and then producing the right environment again, you can get it to bloom after 2 months again, and you'll have a nice, strong, fresh, new flower spike coming out. But if you're leaving this flower spike to rebloom, it can form multiple branches off it. Your flowers are never going to be quite as large as they originally were. You'll never get quite as many flowers as you originally had, and they probably won't last quite as long as what they originally did. That's not to say it's still not going to look beautiful. So that's a personal choice whether you would like to try and keep it flowering off the same flower spike, or remove that flower spike completely and try and force the new one to come up after several months. And now you can slap your mother-in-law's wrists, telling her you know better, and your orchids will love you for it. Thank you for watching, and if you have found any information in this video helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing.